The most expensive mistake is often made long before anyone realizes who is truly in control. The departure lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport buzzed with the quiet rhythm of another busy morning as travelers hurried toward departure gates carrying briefcases, rolling suitcases, and steaming cups of coffee. Large windows overlooked the waiting aircraft while gentle announcements echoed through the terminal, reminding passengers that boarding had begun for Flight 217 bound for San Francisco. Business executives reviewed presentations, families organized backpacks, and frequent travelers settled comfortably into familiar routines before another cross-country journey. Near the boarding line stood a woman who attracted almost no attention. Victoria Hayes carried a modest black travel bag that showed years of careful use. She wore a light beige sweater beneath a charcoal blazer, dark slacks, comfortable walking shoes, and no expensive jewelry beyond a simple silver watch. Her neatly arranged chestnut hair framed a calm face whose gentle expression reflected patience instead of authority. Nothing about her appearance suggested extraordinary influence. Several passengers quietly stepped ahead of her without apology, assuming she was simply another traveler waiting her turn. Victoria smiled politely and allowed each person to pass without complaint. She listened carefully to conversations surrounding her while observing the airport staff greeting passengers with practiced professionalism. Every smile, every greeting, and every small interaction quietly held her attention. When boarding for the first-class cabin began, Victoria presented her boarding pass to the gate agent with a warm smile. The agent briefly examined the ticket before looking once toward Victoria's simple clothing, then back toward the computer screen. A moment of quiet hesitation crossed the employee's face before another quick scan confirmed the reservation. The boarding pass was returned together with a courteous welcome, although the brief uncertainty did not escape Victoria's notice. She thanked the employee sincerely before walking down the jet bridge without revealing the slightest reaction. Inside the aircraft, polished cabin lighting reflected softly across wide leather seats prepared for premium passengers. Flight attendants welcomed guests with friendly greetings while helping them locate overhead storage. Daniel Brooks, the senior flight purser, moved confidently through the aisle ensuring every detail met company standards before departure. Years of experience had taught him to evaluate passengers quickly, often believing he could recognize frequent premium travelers within seconds. As Victoria quietly approached seat 2A, Daniel glanced toward her travel bag and modest appearance before briefly checking the seat number displayed on her boarding pass. His expression remained professional, yet a subtle trace of uncertainty appeared across his face. Rachel Simmons, another flight attendant preparing the first-class cabin, noticed Daniel's brief pause. They exchanged a quiet glance before returning to their duties. Victoria gently placed her travel bag inside the overhead compartment, carefully folded her blazer across the armrest, and settled comfortably beside the window. Through the aircraft glass she watched baggage vehicles crossing the ramp beneath the bright morning sunlight while ground crews completed final preparations for departure. Around her, other first-class passengers discussed investment meetings, technology conferences, and business negotiations scheduled after landing. Victoria listened quietly without joining any conversation. Instead, she opened a small notebook and calmly reviewed several handwritten observations before closing it once again. Daniel continued greeting additional passengers, occasionally looking toward seat 2A with thoughtful curiosity. Something about Victoria seemed unexpectedly composed despite her remarkably simple appearance. Yet he quickly dismissed the thought, believing the flight would unfold like countless others before it. The aircraft door closed, the engine slowly came to life, and the journey began. No one inside the premium cabin realized that the quiet woman seated beside the window was about to reveal a lesson that would permanently change far more than a single flight. Once the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the familiar rhythm of premium cabin service began. Soft lighting filled the first-class section while the aroma of freshly prepared meals drifted through the aisle. Flight attendants greeted each passenger with practiced smiles, carefully presenting menus before preparing personalized meal service. Business travelers continued reviewing documents while others relaxed beside the windows overlooking endless white clouds stretching across the morning sky. Victoria Hayes quietly closed her notebook and placed it inside her travel bag before accepting a glass of sparkling water with sincere appreciation. She thanked Rachel Simmons for her kindness, then patiently waited as meal orders were collected throughout the cabin. Every interaction around her appeared smooth, efficient, and carefully rehearsed. Daniel Brooks moved confidently from seat to seat, confirming each passenger's preferred entree. When he finally arrived beside seat 2A, he briefly looked at Victoria, then glanced once more toward the passenger manifest displayed upon his service tablet. A faint expression of uncertainty returned to his face. He politely asked to see her boarding pass once again, explaining that he wished to verify a seating detail before serving the meal. Victoria calmly removed the boarding pass from her travel wallet and handed it to him without hesitation. Daniel carefully compared the document against the electronic passenger list. The information matched perfectly. Seat 2A remained assigned to Victoria Hayes. Yet instead of simply continuing with service, he hesitated. He quietly explained that there might have been an unexpected catering adjustment and suggested that the premium meal selected for first-class guests might no longer be available for her seat. Victoria listened attentively before gently asking whether every other passenger in the cabin would still receive the meal they had chosen. Daniel answered that, as far as he knew, everyone else's selection remained available. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. She thanked him for the explanation and politely asked whether another first-class option could be prepared instead. Daniel replied that the remaining meals had already been allocated according to the manifest and that only a standard economy meal could now be offered if she wished. Several nearby passengers quietly lifted their eyes from laptops and newspapers after hearing the conversation. No raised voices interrupted the peaceful cabin. Victoria maintained exactly the same calm expression she had carried since boarding the aircraft. She smiled gently and accepted the alternative without complaint. Rachel looked briefly toward Daniel, appearing slightly surprised by the unusual decision, but continued serving other passengers according to instruction. Moments later, every first-class passenger except Victoria received an elegantly presented meal served upon polished dinnerware. Victoria alone received the simplified alternative meal normally prepared for the main cabin. She thanked Rachel warmly before quietly arranging the tray on her table as though nothing unusual had happened. Rather than expressing disappointment, Victoria carefully observed the surrounding service. She noticed how crew members addressed passengers by name, how requests were handled, how questions were answered, and how small moments of professionalism shaped the overall experience. From time to time she quietly wrote several short observations inside her notebook before returning it to her travel bag. Daniel occasionally glanced toward seat 2A, expecting frustration or complaints that never arrived. Instead he found Victoria calmly enjoying her meal while watching the clouds beyond the window with peaceful composure. The silence surrounding her response gradually became more uncomfortable than any argument could have been. Unknown to everyone in the premium cabin, the quiet woman who accepted unequal treatment without protest had already learned everything she needed to know, and every thoughtful observation she recorded would soon carry far greater importance than anyone aboard the aircraft could possibly imagine. The remainder of the flight continued with quiet efficiency, yet an almost invisible shift had settled across the first-class cabin. Daniel Brooks resumed supervising the premium service exactly as he had done hundreds of times before, but every time he glanced toward seat 2A he found Victoria Hayes responding with the same calm courtesy that had characterized every interaction since boarding. She thanked Rachel Simmons whenever fresh coffee or bottled water was offered, smiled politely whenever someone walked past her seat, and never once mentioned the meal she had not received. The complete absence of complaint created a strange feeling that Daniel could not explain. Most travelers who believed they had been treated unfairly expressed disappointment immediately. Victoria did the opposite. She quietly observed everything around her with patient attention. As the flight crossed the Rocky Mountains beneath clear blue skies, several first-class passengers began casual conversations with one another. A technology executive discussed market trends with another traveler while a retired attorney shared stories about international travel. Victoria occasionally listened with interest but spoke only when someone addressed her directly. Her thoughtful answers were brief, respectful, and remarkably well informed. At one point the discussion shifted toward customer experience inside large corporations. One passenger commented that many companies focused heavily on advertising while paying far less attention to the actual experience customers remembered. Victoria smiled gently before answering that the smallest moments often shaped a company's reputation more than its largest marketing campaigns. She explained that people rarely remembered polished slogans, but they always remembered how another human being made them feel. Several passengers nodded thoughtfully, impressed by the quiet wisdom behind her words. Daniel overheard part of the conversation while organizing service supplies near the galley. Something about Victoria's observations sounded surprisingly familiar, almost identical to leadership principles discussed during executive management seminars the airline occasionally required for senior supervisors. He looked toward her once more with growing curiosity. Rachel also seemed increasingly puzzled. During another beverage service she quietly apologized that the preferred meal had not been available. Victoria simply thanked her for the kindness and assured her that she appreciated the care Rachel had shown throughout the flight. There was no frustration in her voice, only genuine warmth. Rachel returned to the galley feeling unexpectedly uncomfortable. She had followed every instruction given to her, yet something about the situation no longer felt entirely right. Victoria opened her small notebook again and calmly wrote several additional observations. She noted not only the difference in meal service but also the tone of conversations, the willingness of individual employees to help passengers, and the subtle influence leadership decisions created throughout the cabin. She never wrote emotionally. Each sentence appeared organized, objective, and surprisingly detailed. Daniel happened to notice one page as Victoria briefly closed the notebook. Instead of personal complaints, he caught a glimpse of carefully written headings that included customer experience, employee decision-making, leadership consistency, and organizational culture. The words immediately caught his attention. Those were not subjects ordinary travelers usually documented during a flight. Before he could consider the thought further, Victoria quietly returned the notebook to her travel bag and looked peacefully through the window where endless clouds stretched toward the distant horizon. Daniel found himself wondering who this remarkably composed passenger truly was. He still believed the unusual meal situation had been a minor operational decision, yet an uncomfortable feeling continued growing inside his mind. Without raising her voice, requesting compensation, or demanding special treatment, Victoria had transformed a routine flight into something entirely different. Unknown to everyone around her, every quiet observation she continued recording was steadily building a picture far more important than a single passenger experience, and by the time the aircraft touched the runway later that afternoon, those carefully noted details would begin changing far more lives than anyone aboard the flight could possibly expect. As the aircraft continued westward through clear afternoon skies, the atmosphere inside the first-class cabin remained outwardly calm. Yet Victoria Hayes quietly noticed details that many travelers would never have recognized. Every interaction between the crew and the passengers revealed small habits that reflected something much larger than individual personalities. A delayed response to one request, an inconsistent explanation offered to another traveler, and subtle differences in courtesy depending upon appearance gradually formed a pattern that only careful observation could uncover. Victoria never interrupted the routine. Instead she watched patiently, allowing every moment to speak for itself. Daniel Brooks continued supervising the premium cabin with the confidence of someone who believed the flight had returned to normal after the unusual meal situation. He checked beverage supplies, spoke briefly with the flight deck, and occasionally thanked passengers for choosing the airline. Whenever he passed seat 2A, however, he found Victoria quietly reading a business magazine or gazing through the window with peaceful composure. Her calmness became increasingly difficult to understand. He expected disappointment, questions, or at least curiosity regarding the missing premium meal. None of those reactions ever appeared. Rachel Simmons approached Victoria once more to offer fresh coffee before landing. Victoria accepted with sincere appreciation and thanked her for the professionalism she had personally demonstrated throughout the journey. Rachel smiled warmly but hesitated before returning to the galley. She quietly admitted that she still wished the earlier situation had unfolded differently. Victoria answered gently that every experience provides an opportunity to learn, especially for organizations willing to examine themselves honestly. The thoughtful response remained in Rachel's mind long after she walked away. A businessman seated across the aisle noticed Victoria writing several additional notes inside her small notebook. Curious, he smiled politely and joked that she must be preparing an important presentation after landing. Victoria returned the smile and answered that careful observations often become valuable when people sincerely wish to improve something meaningful. The businessman nodded with interest, believing she worked as a consultant helping companies strengthen customer service. Victoria neither confirmed nor denied the assumption. She simply closed the notebook and returned it carefully to her travel bag. Daniel happened to overhear the brief conversation. Once again he found himself wondering why an ordinary traveler seemed to speak with such quiet certainty about leadership, culture, and organizational improvement. During his years of flying, he had served celebrities, corporate executives, elected officials, and thousands of premium passengers. Very few communicated with the calm confidence Victoria displayed without ever mentioning titles or accomplishments. The aircraft captain soon announced the initial descent into San Francisco. Passengers secured laptops, adjusted seat belts, and looked through the windows as the coastline slowly appeared beneath scattered afternoon clouds. The cabin lights softened while the crew completed final preparations for arrival. Daniel thanked each passenger individually as he walked through the aisle one last time. When he reached Victoria, he politely wished her an enjoyable stay in California. Victoria smiled warmly and thanked him for the safe journey. Her gracious tone remained exactly the same as it had been since boarding. There was no trace of resentment, only quiet professionalism returned with equal respect. As the aircraft descended toward the runway, Victoria looked once more at the final page inside her notebook. Every observation had been recorded with remarkable objectivity, focusing not upon one meal or one employee but upon leadership decisions, communication, consistency, and organizational values. She gently closed the notebook and placed it beside her travel documents. Around her, passengers prepared to leave another routine flight behind. None of them realized that the real purpose of Victoria's journey had only just begun, and within minutes of the aircraft reaching the gate, the quiet notes resting inside her travel bag would begin changing the future of an entire airline. The aircraft rolled smoothly toward the arrival gate as passengers gathered their personal belongings and prepared to leave. Seatbelts clicked open one after another while overhead compartments quietly swung upward across the first-class cabin. Outside the windows, airport service vehicles crossed the ramp beneath the bright California afternoon sun. Inside the aircraft, Daniel Brooks stood near the forward door thanking each passenger for choosing the airline. Everything appeared completely ordinary, yet Victoria Hayes remained seated for a few extra moments, calmly organizing her notebook, boarding pass, and travel documents with deliberate care. She never appeared rushed. She never displayed frustration. Instead, she quietly watched the final moments of the flight exactly as she had observed every stage of the journey. Rachel Simmons approached once more with a warm smile and sincerely thanked Victoria for her patience throughout the flight. Victoria returned the kindness with genuine appreciation and quietly said that professionalism always begins with individual choices, even when circumstances become difficult. Rachel smiled politely, although she continued wondering why those simple words carried such unusual weight. As the aisle gradually emptied, Daniel stepped beside Victoria's seat one final time. He apologized for the inconvenience regarding the unavailable premium meal and explained that operational adjustments occasionally created unexpected situations. Victoria listened attentively before asking one calm question. She wondered whether the company normally investigated service inconsistencies after flights or whether they were simply recorded and forgotten. Daniel answered confidently that customer concerns were always reviewed through the proper reporting process. Victoria nodded thoughtfully and thanked him for the explanation. There was no accusation in her voice, only quiet curiosity. Daniel found himself unexpectedly uncomfortable once again. Before leaving her seat, Victoria glanced toward the cabin one final time. Every detail remained fresh in her memory. She remembered the hesitation at boarding, the second request to verify her ticket, the decision regarding the meal, the different standards applied to passengers, and the sincere efforts made by individual employees who still demonstrated courtesy despite following questionable decisions. None of those observations had been written with emotion. Every note reflected facts rather than opinions. As Victoria stepped into the jet bridge, she removed her mobile phone and calmly sent a brief message. It contained only a few words confirming that she had arrived safely and requesting that the scheduled meeting proceed exactly as planned. Within seconds, a reply appeared confirming that the executive team was already waiting at the terminal. Victoria quietly placed the phone back inside her travel bag without attracting attention. Daniel remained inside the aircraft supervising the final cabin inspection before the next departure. Yet he could not ignore the growing feeling that something important remained unresolved. Victoria had accepted every inconvenience with remarkable grace, but her questions, observations, and unusual understanding of leadership continued returning to his thoughts. Rachel admitted that she had never met a passenger who remained so calm after receiving noticeably different treatment. Daniel agreed, although he still believed the matter had ended with a simple apology. Outside the aircraft, Victoria walked steadily through the terminal without changing her relaxed pace. Travelers hurried around her toward baggage claim, connecting flights, and waiting transportation. A short distance beyond the arrival corridor, several professionally dressed executives quietly gathered near a private meeting area while checking their watches. The moment they noticed Victoria approaching, each one immediately straightened with unmistakable respect. None of the airline employees inside the aircraft could see what was about to unfold beyond the terminal doors. They believed another routine flight had successfully concluded. In reality, the journey that truly mattered had only just reached its beginning, and within the next few minutes the quiet passenger whose dignity never wavered would reveal a truth capable of transforming not only careers but the entire culture of the airline itself. Victoria Hayes walked calmly through the private arrival corridor where a group of senior executives had already gathered outside the secure terminal entrance. The moment they recognized her, every conversation immediately stopped. Michael Turner, the airline's chief operating officer, stepped forward with genuine respect and warmly welcomed her to San Francisco. Several vice presidents, regional directors, and corporate advisors followed with the same professional courtesy, each thanking her for personally completing the unannounced passenger experience evaluation. Victoria greeted every executive by name before quietly asking whether the conference room at the airport headquarters had been prepared. Michael confirmed that everything was ready and explained that department leaders had been waiting for her arrival before beginning the scheduled executive meeting. As they walked together through the executive entrance, Victoria calmly handed her small notebook to Michael without saying another word. He carefully opened the first page while continuing toward the conference facility. His expression gradually changed as he read the detailed observations recorded throughout the flight. Every note was factual, organized, and remarkably objective. The report praised employees who demonstrated kindness while carefully identifying leadership decisions that created inconsistent service standards. Michael slowly closed the notebook and quietly apologized that her first official inspection had produced such disappointing findings. Victoria answered gently that she had not traveled expecting perfection. She had traveled expecting honesty, consistency, and respect for every passenger regardless of appearance. Meanwhile, aboard the aircraft, Daniel Brooks completed the final cabin inspection before preparing for the next departure. Airport operations suddenly informed him that he, Rachel Simmons, and several supervisory employees were requested to attend an immediate meeting at the airport headquarters before continuing their normal assignments. Although surprised by the unexpected instruction, Daniel assumed it involved routine operational procedures following arrival. A short time later, Daniel, Rachel, and several managers entered the executive conference room. The moment the doors opened, every conversation quietly stopped. At the front of the room stood Victoria Hayes beside Michael Turner. She wore the same simple clothing, carried the same modest travel bag, and displayed the same calm expression that had accompanied her throughout the entire journey. Yet the atmosphere surrounding her had changed completely. Michael addressed the room with measured professionalism. He formally introduced Victoria as the newly appointed chief executive officer and majority owner of the airline following the completion of a major corporate acquisition finalized only days earlier. He explained that before implementing any organizational changes, Victoria had insisted upon experiencing the airline exactly as an ordinary passenger without advance notice or executive privileges. A profound silence settled across the conference room. Daniel felt every detail of the flight replaying inside his mind with startling clarity. The boarding hesitation, the unnecessary ticket verification, the unequal meal service, and every quiet observation Victoria had patiently recorded suddenly carried entirely different meaning. Rachel lowered her eyes briefly as realization settled over the room. Victoria looked calmly toward every employee before speaking in the same gentle voice they had heard aboard the aircraft. She explained that leadership begins by listening before making decisions. She thanked those employees whose professionalism remained consistent throughout the journey while acknowledging that several important weaknesses had also become visible. Her purpose, she explained, had never been to embarrass individuals. It had been to discover whether company values truly existed beyond written policy manuals. No one interrupted her. Every employee understood that the quiet passenger they had underestimated had not arrived searching for special treatment. She had arrived searching for the truth, and after one ordinary flight, the future of the entire airline was quietly waiting for the decisions that would soon follow. The conference room remained completely silent after Victoria Hayes finished speaking. No one reached for a notebook, no one adjusted a chair, and no one attempted to explain away what had happened aboard the flight. The quiet atmosphere carried far more weight than raised voices ever could. Daniel Brooks stood motionless beside the other supervisors, replaying every decision he had made from the moment Victoria presented her boarding pass until the aircraft reached the gate. For the first time in many years, his confidence gave way to honest self-reflection. Victoria slowly looked around the room before speaking again. She explained that the report she had written during the flight did not measure the quality of a meal alone. It measured something much more important. It measured whether employees allowed appearances to influence professional judgment. She reminded everyone that company values only become meaningful when they remain consistent for every customer, every day, without exception. Michael Turner quietly displayed several pages from Victoria's notebook on the large presentation screen. Every observation appeared remarkably balanced. Beside each concern, Victoria had also recognized employees who demonstrated patience, courtesy, and genuine professionalism. Rachel Simmons immediately noticed that her willingness to remain respectful throughout the flight had been specifically acknowledged. She felt both relieved and humbled by the recognition. Daniel carefully read each observation as it appeared on the screen. Victoria had never accused him of acting with bad intentions. Instead, she described how assumptions had quietly influenced decisions that should have been based entirely upon policy and equal treatment. The difference struck him deeply. Rather than attacking individuals, she had exposed weaknesses within habits that had gradually become accepted as normal. Victoria then addressed Daniel directly, but her voice remained calm and respectful. She asked whether he believed the same meal decision would have been made if another passenger wearing an expensive designer suit had occupied seat 2A. Daniel lowered his eyes for a brief moment before answering honestly that he could no longer say yes with complete confidence. The room remained silent as he admitted that appearance had probably influenced his judgment more than he had realized. Victoria thanked him for his honesty. She explained that acknowledging a mistake represented the first step toward genuine leadership. She reminded every manager present that fear rarely creates lasting improvement, while accountability combined with learning often transforms an entire organization. Several department leaders quietly nodded in agreement. The discussion no longer centered upon one flight or one employee. It had become a conversation about the culture every leader helped create through daily decisions. Michael then informed the management team that Victoria had personally requested no immediate disciplinary action before the review meeting. She wanted every conclusion to be based upon facts, complete investigations, and fair evaluation rather than emotional reactions. The announcement surprised everyone in the room. Daniel had expected immediate consequences. Instead, he found himself receiving something far more valuable. He was being given an opportunity to understand, improve, and earn trust again through future actions. Victoria closed her notebook and smiled gently. She explained that companies become exceptional when employees feel responsible not only for procedures but also for the dignity of every person they serve. Every traveler carries a different story that cannot be recognized through clothing, luggage, or outward appearance. Professional respect must never depend upon visible status. As the meeting concluded, the atmosphere inside the conference room had changed completely. No one hurried toward the exit. Managers quietly discussed new ideas for training, communication, and customer experience while Daniel remained standing near the conference table, realizing that the most important lesson of his career had arrived from the one passenger he had understood the least. In that quiet moment, everyone present recognized that true leadership had revealed itself not through power or authority, but through humility, fairness, and the courage to improve what others had accepted for far too long. The executive meeting continued long after the formal presentation had ended, yet the atmosphere inside the conference room no longer felt tense. Instead, it carried the quiet determination of people who understood that meaningful change had become both necessary and possible. Victoria Hayes remained at the head of the conference table, her modest travel bag resting beside her chair exactly where she had placed it upon arriving. Nothing about her appearance had changed since boarding the flight that morning, yet everyone now saw her through completely different eyes. Michael Turner projected a detailed improvement plan onto the large display while department leaders carefully reviewed each recommendation contained inside Victoria's notebook. Rather than focusing on isolated mistakes, the report emphasized consistency, leadership accountability, communication, and equal treatment for every passenger regardless of clothing, age, profession, or visible social status. Victoria explained that exceptional customer service could never depend upon assumptions. It depended upon habits repeated correctly every single day. Daniel Brooks listened carefully to every recommendation while quietly reflecting upon his own leadership. He realized that none of the decisions made aboard the flight had been intentionally disrespectful. They had simply grown from unconscious habits that no one had challenged for years. That realization affected him more deeply than criticism ever could have. Rachel Simmons also recognized how easily small moments shaped the reputation of an entire company. She promised herself that every future passenger would receive the same level of warmth and professionalism regardless of appearance. Victoria then introduced the first company-wide initiative under her leadership. Every employee, from executives to frontline staff, would participate in a renewed hospitality program centered upon empathy, fairness, and thoughtful decision-making. Managers would spend scheduled days working directly alongside customer-facing teams so leadership could better understand daily challenges instead of relying only upon reports and statistics. She explained that strong organizations improve when leaders remain connected to real experiences rather than comfortable assumptions. The proposal immediately received unanimous support throughout the room. Michael added that anonymous passenger evaluations conducted by senior executives would become a permanent part of company operations. The purpose would never be to surprise employees or search for mistakes. Instead, it would ensure that leadership regularly experienced the same service every traveler received. Daniel slowly raised his hand and respectfully asked permission to speak. Looking directly toward Victoria, he sincerely apologized once more for allowing assumptions to influence his judgment. He admitted that the experience had changed the way he viewed both leadership and customer care. Victoria thanked him for his honesty and explained that genuine improvement always begins when people accept responsibility without searching for excuses. She made it clear that the future would be shaped by consistent actions rather than one difficult day. Those words immediately eased the room while strengthening everyone's commitment to change. Before concluding the meeting, Victoria quietly removed the notebook that had accompanied her throughout the journey. She placed it at the center of the conference table and explained that every page represented an opportunity rather than a failure. She hoped the notebook would remain inside the executive offices as a reminder that one ordinary passenger could reveal extraordinary truths about an entire organization. No one spoke for several moments after she finished. The silence itself became the strongest acknowledgement of her message. As the executives slowly gathered their materials and prepared to begin implementing the new standards, the culture of the airline had already started changing. It did not change because of authority alone. It changed because one calm leader chose wisdom instead of anger, accountability instead of humiliation, and lasting improvement instead of temporary punishment, proving that the strongest organizations are built when respect becomes the standard every person can trust. 6 months passed, and the transformation inside the airline became visible long before annual reports confirmed the results. Travelers noticed warmer greetings at boarding gates, more attentive service throughout every cabin, and a renewed sense of professionalism that reached every employee regardless of position. Customer satisfaction steadily increased as passengers shared stories about thoughtful service and genuine kindness instead of polished marketing campaigns. Industry publications praised the airline's remarkable improvement, yet few people outside the company understood where the change had truly begun. Inside the executive headquarters, the small notebook Victoria Hayes had carried during her first anonymous flight remained displayed inside a glass case near the leadership conference room. New managers paused beside it before attending orientation sessions, reading the simple inscription placed beneath it. Great companies are built one respectful decision at a time. The notebook became far more than a personal reminder. It represented the culture every employee now worked together to protect. Daniel Brooks continued serving as senior flight purser, but his leadership style had quietly evolved. Every new flight attendant assigned to his team received the same advice before greeting the first passenger. He reminded them that no uniform, suitcase, or appearance could ever reveal the full story of the person standing before them. Professional respect must always arrive before personal assumptions. Rachel Simmons became one of the airline's most respected training instructors, helping new employees understand that outstanding hospitality begins with listening, patience, and consistency rather than complicated procedures alone. Her classes often included practical examples showing how small moments could create lifelong customer loyalty. Victoria occasionally traveled anonymously on ordinary flights exactly as she had done before. She never announced executive visits in advance and never expected special attention. Instead, she quietly experienced the airline alongside every other traveler, celebrating improvements while continuing to identify opportunities for growth. Each journey reminded her that leadership remained a continuous responsibility rather than a destination already reached. During one afternoon flight, Daniel welcomed passengers aboard another cross-country route. Near the boarding door he noticed an elderly traveler wearing simple clothes and carrying an old canvas bag. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped forward with a genuine smile, personally helped store the luggage, and warmly thanked the passenger for choosing the airline. Watching quietly from several rows away, Victoria smiled to herself. No announcement marked the moment. No audience applauded. Yet she recognized that the lesson learned months earlier had become a lasting habit rather than a temporary reaction. That quiet act of respect meant more than any public ceremony ever could. At the following annual company gathering, Michael Turner summarized the remarkable progress achieved throughout the organization. Revenue had grown, employee engagement had improved, and customer trust continued reaching record levels. He concluded by reminding every leader that none of those achievements began with a new advertising campaign or expensive technology. They began with one ordinary flight, one thoughtful notebook, and one leader who chose wisdom instead of anger when given every opportunity to react differently. Victoria accepted the audience's applause with the same quiet grace she had shown from the beginning. She simply thanked every employee for choosing improvement together and reminded them that tomorrow's passengers deserved exactly the same respect as today's. As the gathering ended, employees returned to airports across the country carrying more than updated procedures. They carried a renewed understanding that every traveler deserves dignity before judgment, kindness before assumption, and professionalism without exception. Long after that unforgettable flight faded into memory, the greatest legacy Victoria left behind was never her title as Chief Executive Officer. It was the culture she quietly created, proving that true leadership is measured not by the authority to punish, but by the wisdom to inspire people to become the very best version of themselves every single day.